In this video series, we'll delve into the biblical timeline of history. We aim to uncover the significance of important historical dates, such as the creation in 11,013 BC, the flood in 4990 BC, and even the date when God would bring judgment upon the house of God, the churches, as mentioned in 1 Peter 4:17. We'll also explore the date of Judgment Day, which is also alluded to in the same verse. And you might be wondering what the biblical timeline of history is and why it's important to learn. These dates weren't placed in the Bible arbitrarily. They serve a purpose beyond mere knowledge. God always has a reason for concealing truths within the Bible. These essential dates are not explicitly stated in verses, but require meticulous exploration through comparing Scripture with Scripture, the biblical method for revealing truth, mathematical analysis, and ultimately guidance from God's Holy Spirit. So what exactly is the biblical timeline of history? It's a timeline that spans across the Bible, beginning with the first book, Genesis. This timeline then extends into subsequent books and chapters. Why should we invest time in learning about the biblical timeline of history? The answer can be found in Ecclesiastes 8:5. Whoso keepeth the commandment shall feel no evil thing, and a wise man's heart discerneth both time and judgment. To comprehend the current time or season, understanding past biblical events is essential to understand when future events will occur that the Bible is prophesied about.
All right, welcome back, everyone. We got Brian with me. Brian, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Right. Let me, so this is going to be, tonight's episode is going to be episode 32, and it's called Interesting Time Paths, Part 2. So the last episode, we went over some time paths, and we're getting pretty close to getting towards the end of the timeline. So I figured now is a good time to definitely start introducing the concept of time paths, and because we're going to need those. A lot of that's those time paths are proofs for like the dates that we've discovered. So let's get right into it. All right. So to get to the timeline, you got to go to ebiblefellowship.org. And once there, just a reminder, always check the announcements part that's at the top here for announcements. This will give you the schedule. Things have been changing frequently, so try to look for this as often as you can. And on the right side, you'll find the timeline right there. You can also find it here below. All right. Okay, so if you didn't watch last episode, which was last Sunday, we were going over a lot of the different time paths, and we've been doing this probably the past few episodes. We went over Abraham's time path. We saw the different numbers God uses in the Bible. We saw Ishmael's time path, but that takes us to 2029. Jacob's time path takes us to several dates, such as 1994, 2033. I'm just going to zoom out a little bit. We saw Joseph's time path, which I thought was interesting. And that takes us to 1994, 2011, and 2029. It also takes you to 539 BC. We have the time path that Mr. Camping had discovered with the 1290, broken up into 3 periods of 430. And that took us to 1994. We have Amram's time path. I noticed on Facebook, Chris said it's the death of Kohath, which is also the same year that Amram was born. So whether it's saying the same thing, the death of Kohath or the birth of Amram, but with this time path, it's actually using his age of 137, which is essentially the same math. And that gets you to 2033. We saw with Moses, that gets you to the cross and also to 2033. I just wanted to point out that we're kind of highlighting key dates here, but there are other events that do take place in between. and they are important dates. We just don't always mention them. We kind of focus on the the very significant dates, such as end time dates. We saw the time path with the Exodus and how the 430 gets you to 1994 times 8. And if you start with the entering into the wilderness, and then the entering into the promised land 40 years later, and you apply the same 430 8 times, you get to 2033. We saw with the promised land to Christ's birth, Mr. Camping had discovered that there's 1400 years. We saw with the 440, this is the space of the judges period, starting with Moses until Samuel, and that also takes you to 2033. And you'll notice most of these time paths tend to take you to 2033, but we also do see 1994. And I would like to kind of add these up to see how many times each year is used. Eventually, I'll get to that. And then, yeah, so pretty much that's how far we got. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually just kind of backtrack in the beginning, because there's actually time paths. I mean, there's time paths from these earlier patriarchs that land on significant dates. So we'll go into that. Is there anything you want to add, Brian, before I do that?
No, go ahead.
Oh, and I did want to mention a lot of these, I'm kind of a visual learner, so I like to see things laid out visually. And I know other people are more logical, and they like to see like the math and the formulas and all of that. And
Guilty as charged.
so that would probably be more of like Brian. And he uses the Excel sheet. I'm a visual learner, so people have different ways of learning, and I think so that's why I want to kind of provide both methods for people. And we have Brian's Excel sheet on the website. If you click that right here, I'm gonna zoom in. You'll see that here with all the dates. So if you kind of just want to get right to the numbers, that's all laid out here. I plan on putting Chris's timesheet document on the website as well. And that's good because he's found a lot of time paths to 2033. Now we're laying it out here visually with these with what you just saw. So that this is a visual way to look at the time path. Whereas when he posted on Facebook, it's just numbers, right? So if you go to his Facebook wall, you'll see here that he had come up with I think there was about 35. There's more, but he had just listed 35 time paths to the date of 2033. And he also provides the number breakdown. So here you start from Adam's age of 130. That gets you to 2033. And we're going to get into that in just a little bit. Yeah, so basically all this information is eventually getting put onto this page on the timeline in a visual format, but it's also going to be listed like this as well. So if you're just interested in just looking at the numbers, you'll have both options essentially. Yeah, so we've already listed some of these. Let me see if I can find, let's see. Yeah, so we just looked at this one. This is the 430, the 8 times 430 when Israel enters into Canaan. So to see that on the timeline, that's this one right here, this time path. This is when 1407, when Israel enters the promised land. That starts here, the 430. That's what Chris is pointing out right here, 8 times 430. And this is how many years that spans, 3,440 years. So, yeah, we're going to just continue on going down, and we'll see how God uses all these numbers and how it all fits really well. And kind of just wanted to point out that this really goes to show, the timeline really goes to show that a man couldn't have put this all together, because you have to have an understanding of not just all the numbers, how they all line up perfectly like this. You have to know, I mean, the precision of like Moses's lifespan, or God allowed Moses to live a certain age to be able to do a time path, right? he also allowed Moses to be born at a specific date, at 1527. If Moses wasn't born here, then you couldn't properly do this time path if it was a year off or a few years off. And so this is why it's very precise, when Moses was born, when Moses died, and how old he lived. Those are all important numbers in that person's life. So I'm sure Moses, when he lived to be 120, he wasn't thinking, oh, um, you know, maybe God wants me to live to be 120 because my life is going to represent something on the timeline in the future. A lot of times these elect that lived in the past, they didn't realize what they would be being used for the future elect just to see this information. So just thought that was interesting. Now, as far as why a man couldn't have laid this out is because you see not only it's very precise, but you see that the Bible was written over the period of about 1500 years, and that actually started with Moses in about 1447. Sometime between 1447 and 1407, the Bible began to be written, and it didn't stop until about 1500 years later, which would have been, these are just rough numbers, that would take you to 53 AD. I think that was around the time when John wrote the book of Revelations. So what is that, Brian? About 20 years after Christ was crucified?
Give or take. I mean, we don't know the exact year, but thereabouts.
Yeah. So here you have a book. So if one man sat down and spent a year to put this all together, that's not how the Bible was written. It was written over the course of 1500 years. You have books written hundreds of years apart, right? And yet all these numbers align with that information. So yeah. Okay.
And different, we might say different authors. I would say different scribers, whether it be Moses with the Pentateuch or Solomon with Ecclesiastes and Song of Songs and um, the Proverbs. David wrote many, if not all, of the Psalms. We don't know who wrote all the books, but different. Humans would say different authors. I would say different scribers, but it gives the appearance of different authors.
Yeah.
And really, this all highlights the brilliance of God because all Camping did, and all Carl and I are continuing to do, and Chris too, is just to reverse engineer that which God put in the Bible. And it just goes to show the intricate mind, or it gives a small sample of how intricate, God has created this universe and how brilliant his mind really is.
Yeah. Not to mention, Usher's calendar of 6,000 years and the Jewish calendar of thereabout, they could never do something like this because their numbers are off, they took verses at face value instead of carefully comparing scripture to scripture. And granted, God didn't, I mean, many of the elect didn't understand this information for a long time, but even now when it's been unsealed, they still don't understand it. You don't see, you know, these Christians making correction. Oh, I took a look at Mr. Camping's timeline and I see, how Usher's is incorrect. They stick with that timeline. I'm sure that they've heard, um, of this timeline, but for them, and they haven't made correction because there's issues with even if they don't agree with how we've come to some conclusions, we can know for sure they made an issue with our Arphaxad and Selah because the Bible lets us know that there's a man born in between Arphaxad and Selah, that's Canaan. And so already right there, that's one error that they haven't corrected because they assume that Selah is born immediately to Arphaxad, which the Bible lets us know actually there's a man named Canaan that's firstborn and then begat Canaan begat Selah. So that's just one example of something that even if they thought they had everything else correct, the Bible just proves, pretty openly that this is incorrect. So anyways, we're gonna get back to starting on the timeline with these time paths. So here we have Adam, and I think I've showed this one before, and I believe Chris has this one on his timeline. I'm not sure. Oh, I just wanted to mention too, occasionally I'll post different time paths on Facebook just to show, you know, I thought this was a cool image. It kind of lays out all of the different time paths so you can kind of see how detailed God's timeline is. So look out for those posts because I'll do that every once in a while. Okay, as far as with Adam, if you look at so Adam had a son at 130, that Seth wasn't his first son because we know Cain and Abel was born first. But if you click this box, it says, and Adam lived 130 years and begat a son in his own likeness after his image and called his name Seth. So we know that's an immediate son because Kerasim is used. And so, yeah, but if you take this 130, so rather than taking Adam's whole lifespan, we see God is breaking down his lifespan into 130, right? So 930, a second. Let's see. 930 minus 130, what is that? 800. So Adam has 800 years left of his life, but God is highlighting this 130 in his life. And so it turns out if you take this partial lifespan of 130 and you replicate that, you replicate it 100 times, we get to the 13,000th year of human history. So that's 1988, and that's the time of the end, right? This is when the end officially, the beginning of the end, right? Not how the Bible describe. When I say end, I don't mean like the Bible lets us know that May 21 was actually the end. Let me pull that up actually because that would be important.
Well, that's when God's spirit left the churches, the corporate churches.
Right. And I guess what I'm trying to say is 13,000 is the error of the end of time, right? To be more specific, but to actually say it's the end of time wouldn't be correct according to Matthew 24. It says in this gospel, so you'll see God says the end is not yet. Let's look at that first. End not yet, right here. And you shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that ye be not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. So this is letting us know the end hasn't yet come, even though you have false prophets, and you have all these things happening. Nation shall rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. These are the beginning of sorrows. Then they shall deliver you up to be afflicted. So this is all during like the church age, right? Then you have false prophets arising, deceiving many. But then it says, but he that shall endure unto the end shall be saved. And then this is where we know when the end begins. It says, in this gospel the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness unto all nations, and then shall the end come. So that's May 21, 2011. That was the beginning of the end, right? So when it says the end, it doesn't mean the last day. It just means it's the end of time, which is actually what the Bible teaches to be a 22-year period. So 13,000 marked the era of the end of time, just like Christ was 11,000 was the era of Christ. Well, he wasn't born until 6 years later, right?
Correct.
Yep. So, and what I also find this to be interesting is, Adam is the first patriarch, and yet this time path is taking you to the end of time. And it reminded me of this verse. See, you'll see this verse on the upcoming timeline, Roku special. Isaiah 46:10, declaring the end from the beginning, and from ancient times the things that are not yet done, saying, my counsel shall stand, and I will do all my pleasure. So God is teaching that he declares things that haven't yet happened, right? And declaring the end and it's from the beginning. And I kind of like to think about that when I look at this, because we see that from the beginning of time, it's this number is actually leading us to the end of time, to the era of the end, which is 13,000. And we know the number 13 has to do with judgment. So just thought I'd share that.
And even if you're not even looking at the timeline, if you go back to Genesis, for example, we read very early on of how Cain murdered Abel. And this is a picture of how the elect were driven out of the corporate churches.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and who would have known that something written so, that happened so many years before was to picture something in the future, even just at the beginning of time, which actually shows how God set up the time, not only the timeline, but the stories in the Bible portray these truths. So moving on to Seth, I noticed that Chris had posted this one right here. Seth is born to Adam at 130. Now what he did is he just took the time from Seth, when Seth is born, and all the way to 2033, and that's 12,915 years. Separately, what I did is I just took the 105 right here and just replicated it. So if you click this, so at 105, Seth begets Enos. So if you take that time span of 105 and you replicate that 123 times, you're going to land in the year 2033. And these are actual years, by the way. This isn't counting calendar years where you include the first year. So these are actual years, and this takes you to 2033. Now you're going to see some of the time paths are actual years, some of them are calendar years. They're both biblically correct, though, to use both methods. It's just a matter of finding out which method God is using for that particular patriarch. So I think this is pretty interesting because here, just with these first two time paths, you have this one taking you to 1988, and you have this one taking you to 2033. And we know that from 1988 to 2033 is 45 years. So just at the very beginning, it's taken us to that to the end of time, that time path, that 45-year time path. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Let's see. And then if you want to know exactly how many years this is, you just add up all the 105s, but you just type in 105 times 123. It's exactly 12,950 years. So I think I put that on here. Oh, I must have forgot. But yeah, you can just do the math yourself. You just add this up, and that will tell you how much time from here to the end of time. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is move on. And if we haven't filled up the whole timeline with all these time paths, but typically we'll either take the whole lifespan. Like if you take Adam's whole lifespan of 930, it doesn't actually get you anywhere that's significant. So if you don't see a time path, it just means that God didn't set one up, or he's not highlighting that. So I just wanted to point that out. One thing I did notice, I didn't put it on the timeline, but I just thought was interesting, is that once you get to Canaan, we can no longer, they're not immediate sons. And so here it says Canaan was 70 years old when he begot Mahaliel. Now we know because Kerasim isn't used, this isn't an immediate son. So it just means he begat a son, which eventually begot Mahaliel, the year that Canaan died, right? So this would have been a grandson, great-grandson, etc. However, if you use the partial lifespan of 70 rather than Canaan's whole lifespan, because I don't think his whole lifespan takes you anywhere of 910, but I did find his partial lifespan does, I think. I don't know if it's anywhere significant, but one thing I just thought was interesting is that 910 can evenly divide into 70. So essentially, 70 times 13 equals Canaan's whole lifespan of 910. And so this time path here of 70 takes you from the birth of Canaan to Canaan's death right here. I thought that was kind of curious. I haven't seen that with a patriarch before. And 70 is the number for tribulation, and 13 is the number for judgment. And so that equals Canaan's whole lifespan. So maybe God's teaching something with that. I just don't know exactly what it would be.
Yeah. Oh, one of the time paths somebody just wrote in the chat, so I want to thank whoever did that. You had just done a time path with the number 123, and that was the death age of Aaron.
Yeah. Yeah, 123 is found. I think I found it 2 times in the Bible.
What
There
was the
could be
other time?
the death of Aaron, and also if you um, go to the comparison of Ezra versus Nehemiah. These are the children that are returning in Ezra versus Nehemiah, and there's discrepancies, right? So we have yet to figure out what all this means. This is actually proving to be one of the most difficult things to discover in the Bible, what this could all mean, and maybe it relates to the timeline. I'm not sure, but I did notice that you see the children of Bethlehem were 123, and so you see that number right there. I believe you see it one more time. Let me see.
I saw up the top there's a difference of 123 between two numbers.
Yeah, and there's also a difference of 123 from the children of Arah, 775 to 652. You have the difference of 123. So just for context, if somebody doesn't know what this means, this is what we're looking at. This is in the book of Ezra, chapter 2. There's a genealogy of all the children returning from Babylon to Jerusalem. And that would, I believe, picture the elect coming out of the Great Tribulation, Babylon, to go back to Jerusalem. So this would be relating, I think, to the verses like, "Come out of her, my people." And the vessels that were carried into Babylon, the gold and the silver, they're being carried back to Jerusalem. And so what's interesting is as they're being carried back, they kept a genealogy of how many people of the children came were returning. But what's interesting is there's actually discrepancies. So like the first two, the children of Parosh, the children of Sheptiah, they're the same as in Nehemiah. But as soon as you get to the children of Arah, 775, over here it's 652. So there's a discrepancy of 123 people that are unaccounted for. And so, some of us have tried to look at this. It's very difficult to figure out, but it is interesting to see that number 123 here. And we also see it with the children of Bethlehem. I believe it's in one other place. Children of Bethlehem, or yeah, the men of Bethel and Ai right here. They're also 123. So we do see it a few times, and Aaron did die at 123. So, yep. Okay. Brian, I gotta grab my laptop charger. Do you mind? I don't know if you have anything to share. Just to it'd take me about a minute.
Okay. One of the things I can share, um, can you see the spreadsheet?
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay. So I have sent the spreadsheet to a handful of people who have asked for it. I do occasionally make updates to it. Um, so if you want a new updated version, I can send it to you. But I created this tool for Carl to look up these timelines. So so for example, I guess if you started with the year zero here. This will give you the BC date is 11,013, and it gives you the breakdown. It's 3 times 3671, and if you take the 130, and it'll give you the breakdown of 130, and if you do it 100 times, uh, okay, so here I'm doing it as calendar years. You can change this to actual years. And this takes you to the year 13,000, which is equivalent to 1988. And it gives you the breakdown of 13,000. It gives you the breakdown of 1988. And you can add and subtract here, and it'll give you the breakdown here. And let's see, I remember what year was Abraham born? Uh, My year was he born? Well, Jacob was born in 2007 BC, so 2167. And here, this is the EA number, and it gives you the breakdown of that. Here's the 2167 BC, which breaks down to 11 times 197. And if you take the 100 years from when um, Isaac was born, and if you do that 42 times, uh, now here, this was actually calendar years. You can say that this takes us to the year 13,045, and you can see what that breaks down to, which is equivalent to AD 2033, which is 19 times 107. And this does a nice little breakdown, and you can just subtract or add to see different things. We also know that Abraham had a lifespan of, oh, he died at the age
175. 175.
175. I was thinking 187, but
Yeah, 175.
um, and how many was
20,
that?
24 times, I believe.
Oh, 24. Okay. So you just hit this, and these pluses and minuses work, or you can just type it by hand. But this allows you to see the different things. And you can see this again takes you to the year 13,045, which is 2033. And it just gives you a breakdown of all these numbers.
Yeah, it's a very
So,
handy tool. I wish, I'm hoping that we could put it on the website somehow, but we'll have to try to figure that out so other people can use it.
yeah,
But
but if anyone wants the updated version, I'll email you the updated version where you can have this tool because, like I said, the most of the people that I've emailed the spreadsheets to in the past, it was before I created that tool. And up here, if you're curious too, you can type in any number and it will give you the breakdown. So, like for example, you can see here the
definitely,
722,500 days from the cross to May 21. And if you want to do inclusive versus non-inclusive or calendar versus actual, you can you can just hit these plus and minus, and it'll just give you the breakdown of any number that you're interested in.
okay, yeah, I can try to add that Excel document to the website, but he has to somehow get that on Google Excel
Uh,
if possible.
Maybe. I mean, you have the spreadsheet up there, but it's only values. It doesn't do like you can't manipulate it. It's just whatever values. It's static.
Okay.
Not saying that that's not helpful, but the way it's currently uploaded, it doesn't have this functionality. But if somebody wants me to email, um, like we were looking at the 662 versus a 775, which was a difference of 123, and you can see how these things break down, and again, you can just play with these things.
Yeah,
Um,
if maybe somehow we could actually build it into the website. I'm not sure if it's possible. It would be very convenient. That way, even when you're on the timeline, you could just go to the calculator and try to calculate the numbers yourself. Of course, you can
can
always,
you operate Google Sheets within? Like I'm familiar
if
with
you, I think if you
Excel.
access, you should be able to. However, we may not have to use Google Sheets. There may be a built-in function that can do math, but
Okay.
we'll have to figure that out. But anyways, I just thought the 910 was interesting. It's made up of all 1370s. 70 times 13 is 910. So takes you to the beginning of Canaan's birth until the end. So that's interesting. Mahalia, I know we've looked at this before. His 895 years replicated, I believe, 10 times. So that's a total. You just add a zero. So 895 add a zero, and that's 8,950 years. And that will take you to the 13,000th year, sorry, the 11,000th year, which would be 13 BC. So this is when Christ wasn't born yet, but this is the era of when Christ was born. This marked that century, or that millennial, actually, not century, millennial. All right, and then moving on, we're going to go to Jared. So with Jared, I didn't find anything with this 962. I don't recall. But I did. So sometimes when you take their whole lifespans and you don't find anything, don't stop there, consider trying the partial lifespans, because God does give us this number in the Bible of 162. This is when he had a son. It wasn't Enoch, as a lot of Christians suppose, because they don't understand the Kerasim. However, God still gives us that number of 162, and it turns out when you use the 162, so you go from the birth of Jared to the birth of a son. Notice I didn't say Enoch, I just said a son, because that son eventually has sons that bears Enoch. You'll see the 162 takes you to replicated 19 times, which is 3,078 years. That takes you to the flood. And it's kind of interesting because I've actually never seen a time path of a patriarch take you to the flood. It takes you exactly to 4990 BC. And these are actually.
And how many 162s did you say? 31?
This one is 19.
19. Okay.
19. So you want to see the math in real time, you just take the date of 8068 BC. This is when Jared's born. Plus 162, right? That's when he had a son, which eventually leads to Enoch. And you times that by 19, you get to exactly 4990 BC.
Okay.
So
Let me just share my real screen just so I can show you how to use it on mine.
Yeah.
Where's you guys see it? So you just say equals 11,013, and you subtract the BC year. What was the BC year again?
The BC year is 8068. That's Jared's birth.
So this was the year 2945 EA, which breaks down to 5 times 19 times 31, or 8,068 BC is 2 squared times 2017. That's kind of interesting. And what was it, 162?
Yeah, it's 162 times 19.
And if you do it 19 times, all right, so I have it as calendar. I'm going to change it to actual. And that takes you to 6,023, which breaks down to 19 times 317, or 4990 BC, which is 2 times 5 times 499. Here, 162 is 2 times 3 to the fourth power. 19 is a prime number. 8,068 EA. Well, yeah, because we're starting with 8,000. Yeah, well, anyway, it gives the breakdown of everything. So that's how you would use it. And if you wanted to keep going, you could just do this and you could see if it lands on.
Yeah, well, there's more. So I'll come right back to this so you can share that again. Let me just, it actually doesn't end. So it stops at the flood, right? So maybe the breakdown would be to just do the whole count and you'll see why. So when we get to the flood, which is right here, by the way, 4990 BC, this is the 19th 162. If you move your mouse down, you'll see it lands exactly, lines up with the 4990 BC. And then you continue for it and you do another 31 160s, which is 162 times 31. And that takes you to the cross, right? So again, 86, negative 80, 68 plus 162. And it's a total of 50, right? And I thought that was interesting. You have to add the 1. So it's 32 AD, but the 1 for no year 0. So these are actual years. And this gets you to from Jared's birth taken to 162, takes you to the flood, and it takes you to the cross. Now, I thought that was interesting because those are both judgments. The flood is a judgment, and the cross was a judgment, right? So you have two judgments in view. And also you have the number 50. That's the number for the Jubilee. Christ was born on a Jubilee, and we've seen how the 50 takes us to 7 BC. So definitely interesting to see that. But other than that, it only takes you to these two dates. So the flood in 4990 and the cross. And yeah, and then this is also from the flood, it's 5,023 years. So this time path kind of has already been discovered from the flood of 4990 BC to the cross. But this is just another way to go about it. And it also starts with Jared's birth. So it's the time path that connects Jared's birth with the flood, and it also connects it to the cross. So I thought that was pretty fascinating to see that. Do you want to show that on your
Sure.
okay.
Yeah, I was actually doing it while you were. I was trying to see if I could find it before you did. It was right about the same time. But here again, this is 50, and you can type it in manually, or you can use these minuses. It takes you to 49, and then you just plus it becomes 50. 2 times 5 squared, 11,045 EA, which is 5 times 47 squared, AD 33, which is 3 times 11. And so again, it gives the breakdown. And if you wanted to go forward, you could just keep on going. I'm just going to type 60 manually and 65, 65. Like if you wanted to, and 64.
Yeah, I think the farthest it'll take you to 50.
Yeah, so this takes you to 1977. And then you add another 162 years, it'll take you to the year 2139 AD, which is red because, that's past AD 33 or 13,045. So that's beyond our timeline. But you can do that and just, play with it and look for dates.
Yeah, and just to show, we're finding a lot of time paths that lead on significant dates, but there's plenty of them that don't. So it's always interesting to find ones that do, because someone might argue, well, I could arbitrarily create a timeline and I'd land on certain dates where you really can't. The timelines, I guess I would challenge somebody to do that. Just come up with your own timeline and try to see if it'll land consistently on dates. You have to set it up, very precisely. So God, who's the master mathematician and understands math better than anyone else, he laid out this timeline, and you see this precision. So, yep.
And that might have been part of why the timeline had to be so. That's why humanity had to exist for so long, so that God could have all these time paths for us to discover later.
Yeah, because you wonder why the Earth was around for 13,000 years. Why not more? So, okay. And one of the first things you notice when you look at the Bible is how many times numbers are used. I mean, numbers make up, they're just mentioned everywhere. There's genealogies and everything's kept track. So it makes you wonder, why don't people spend the time to look at these numbers? Very few books. When you read a book, how many times, a secular book, how many times is a number mentioned? Unless you're looking at a mathematical book, you're going to see it, maybe the page numbers. But here God has put all these numbers in here for us to explore. So moving on past Jared, we get to Enoch. Now, Enoch, I didn't have time to lay it out, but one of his, you can take his entire lifespan of 365, and let me see. Super expensive. Super expensive food. Yeah. Second. All right. 20. Oh, this is the wrong time path. All time paths. We go to Enoch. So Enoch is 365, so 18 times. So what we're going to do is we're going to take his birth of 7106 plus 365. If you do that 18 times, you land in 536, right? Now, if you backtrack a year, so
I'm sorry, what year was Enoch born again?
7106.
3106 BC?
Yeah. But we're going to backtrack a year, so it counts 7106 as the first year. And that's what, so we're counting calendar years. So if you count calendar years, you land in the date of 537 BC. And what that lands on is that's when the temple foundation was laid. You recall in 539 BC, that's when Babylon fell, but it was 2 years later that the Cyrus was commanded to he gave orders that the temple could be built. And the foundation was laid 2 years later in the second year, so that's 537 BC. So when you count calendar years, you land in 537. So I don't know the connection, but just Enoch lands you, his lifespan lands you there. But other than that, his 365 doesn't take you anywhere else that I'm aware of. That's significant. And again, some of these patriarchs may land on significant dates. We just don't know this period right here. Nehemiah through Esther, this is that red zone where we haven't figured out, who lived when, during the time of Nehemiah and Esther. Mr. Camping put forth some ideas, but he wasn't using the Bible to arrive at it per se. Some of it was like secular evidence. And, to be fair, he, recent history has shown to be pretty accurate, like with 539 BC. You can look that up. Secular history shows that's when Babylon fell. And so, but there are some things that they got wrong. Like I looked up certain kings that reigned, like around the time of Cyrus, and it doesn't match with the Bible. There's a Persian king that had reigned in the book of Ezra. That's when the last like 6 years of building the temple were. It was like the king's 6th year, right? And I'll show you this just as an example. This is 6th year. So you see here, and this house was finished on the 3rd day of the month Adar, which was the 6th year of the reign of Darius the king. So if the house began in 537, 537. So the 2nd year, the temple was laid, and you go 46 years, you land in 491, right? Well, 491 would have been the 6th year of this Darius who was reigning, right? So you just backtrack. Second. So 491. To backtrack 6 years. So he begins to reign in 497 BC, this Darius. Now, I don't know if there's a non-accession year or session year. So then it would be 498, right, Brian?
Yeah.
Okay. So it was in this king's 6th year. Now, if you look up 497 and 498, so if I were to ask, let's see. Let's see. What year did Darius? So here we can see that they have Cyrus the Great reigning between this period. Now, the Bible doesn't give us how long this Cyrus reigned, but they did get the date of 539 correct. See, he was renowned for conquering Babylon in 539 BC. And they found this from Babylonian records outside the Bible. 539 is the same exact date we land on when going through the king's timeline, right? We got to 539. So this is where secular history does match up with right? But then if you look at other reigns, you got this one that they put at 522 to 486, but there's none that began to reign. I looked it up. There's about Mr. Campion, I think, went through all the Cyruses in his book Time Has an End, and the Dariuses and the Artaxerxes, and none of them landed. And I'm surprised he didn't see this, but none of them landed on 597 or 598. But according to Ezra, that's when this king began to reign right here. So it shows that you can't always trust secular history, and this is one example of when they're incorrect. But we don't have too much time, so let's finish up this time path.
Well, let me just show one thing really quick. I was just sort of like playing with it while you were talking. And you can use partial lifespan. So rather than his full lifespan of 365, I used his partial lifespan of 65 years. And if you take that 140 times, that takes you to the year 13,006, which is 1994.
Right. Yeah, that's on the timeline. I was going to get to that next, but that's
Oh, okay. But
no.
yeah, you can just play with this, and sometimes it'll yield interesting results.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, we'll look at that, what Brian just talked about right here. Let me see. Yeah, so when you click Enoch's time path, so I didn't show the 365, but I did do the 65-year breakdowns. And the reason why we're using 65, if you look at Enoch, when he was 65 years old, he had a son, right? That's what the Bible says. But yeah, if you take the 65 years and you go, these would be calendar years. In this case, if you do that, let me see. You do it 74 times. That's a total of 4,810 years. You land, and remember that these would be calendar years, so you're counting the year that they're born. You land on Terah's birth, which is right here, on Terah's birth. And then if you go 2 more 65s, you land on Abraham's birth, right? So when Terah was born in 1997, you just add 65 times 2, and you get to 2167. So 2 of those 65, and that's not surprising because 130 is made up of 2 65s, right? 65 times 2 is 130.
Yeah.
So it's half of 130. So it is interesting that 130 is used a few times with Adam, it's used with Terah, and half of 130 is 65. And so it takes you to that. So it takes you there. And then if you continue and go another 21 times from this starting point, you'll get to the latter reign, 1994. That's what Brian just showed. You got to count calendar years. And I think that's a total of, let's see, trying to calculate where I put all the 65s. I think I want to say it's 140. So 70.
Correct, 140, because that's interesting because 14 is a number I come across a lot. For example, 14 generations from Abram to David, 14 from David to the carrying away to Babylon, and 14 from the carrying away to Babylon to Christ. And I mean that's the most straightforward example, but I've been coming across them 14 a lot as well. Um,
Yeah, and Chris, this 9100, Chris says, I think this is on his Facebook page. Might have closed out of it. But one of the time paths he does do is from Enoch's birth to 1994. It's exactly 9100 years. I think Mr. Camping might have discovered that as well. So if you take the 7106 and you go 9100 years, you land exactly on 1994. You got to add one for no year zero, but because we're counting calendar years, we don't have to do that. Right. So you can keep it at 1994. Now I don't know if Chris knew if you took the 65 years of Mr. Camping, the 65 years that the number that the Bible gives us, that also gets you to the same date. So 9100 is just made up of 6500, 65, right? 9100 divided by 65 is 140. So I'm always finding it, I find a lot of you get better results if you use the numbers that the Bible gives you, because God has given us this number 65. Perhaps rather than just seeing what the date's like, projecting it from somebody's birth to a future date. I think it does help to use the numbers that God gives you. Doesn't mean you always have to do that. Like in the case of Abraham, I don't think the Bible mentions when he's 40 years old, but it fits. When Abraham's born, all these 40s take you to 2033, and they're the same set of 40s like with Moses and Jacob. So, but yet the Bible doesn't highlight the number 40. So I'm not saying you have to do it that way. I just find it to be interesting with the numbers the Bible does give us. I think they're clues for us to try those out, see where they land. And so that's what we're doing with all these with these numbers here. We're not just saying, oh, I wonder what 65 means, or we don't think it's just a coincidence that God has given us these numbers. They have to mean something. So I think we're kind of figuring out what they could mean. So anyways, I think that covers all the time paths for today, and we're actually out of time. We'll get through some of these other ones, like our fact set and Selah. They do land on important dates, not necessarily their whole time span, their whole lifespan, but like these ones here, with when they're born. I mean, when they had a son. But yep. So with that said, I think we'll have to end right here because it's already 4:05 my time. And we'll see you guys next Sunday.
Thank you, Carl.
Yep. Thanks a lot, Brian.